Morning, Rock Hill. Pastor Kyle here with just a Monday morning sermon recap. Yesterday we looked at Acts 19 and dreamed some dreams about what God might call Rock Hill to do and be. We did this by looking at the example of what God did in the city of Ephesus as Paul brought the gospel to bear there. And so in starting our Ephesians series, which is going to last the rest of the semester, we looked at the story of how the gospel came to Ephesus and what the gospel did. And so if you look at Acts 19, the first 10 verses kind of give an overview of what happened those 2.5 years, and verses 11 to 40 give three kind of separate incidents or stories that kind of fill in the gaps at a very personal level. But what we see is that the Apostle Paul spent longer there than any other place that he was. He taught through what he described as the whole counsel of God, not withholding anything that he deemed would be helpful to them. And as a result of that, all of Asia heard the word of the gospel, both Jews and Greeks, according to verse 10, which is a really astounding claim. Not just all of Ephesus heard the gospel, but all of Asia. The reason being is that the church in Ephesus was a disciple-making, leader-developing, and church planting and sending church. And so you have churches like the church in Colossae and Laodicea that exist because of the ministry that started in Ephesus. And as leaders were developed, they were sent out so that it could be said the entire region of Asia had a gospel witness somewhere that was faithfully proclaiming and making known Jesus Christ. The stories that really grab us, though, are the stories that tell the gospel's impact on the ground. We see that there was such a movement of God that it was imitated by the seven sons of Sceva, and God has a way of making sure imitations are found out. Secondly, we see that the gospel had such an impact that it actually impacted people's pocketbooks, in that these men who used to be deep in the magic arts took 50,000 days' wages and burned it, 137 years worth of time, because it didn't honor God, and they found something better in Jesus. We also see, and this is astounding, that the gospel so impacted the city that it actually changed the economy. That the idol makers were losing business and started a riot because there simply was no more demand or need for their idol making. It actually began to shut down various aspects of the economy that were anti-God, that were dishonoring to him. And so what would it look like if certain things in our city actually began to shut down because there was no longer a market for them? Not because we picketed them or protested or boycotted, but simply people's hearts were transformed and there wasn't a need for those things anymore. There wasn't a demand. I would love to see Rock Hill Community Church have such an impact in the city where God's power is so clearly and regularly seen, where the gospel impacts our pocketbooks and where the gospel actually impacts the economy and the very fabric and nature of our city and reweaves a new one. To get there, though, we talked about maybe three things that are holding us back. One being spiritual apathy, which is combated by a sense of urgency in that our time is not forever, expectancy that God will and does move, and so an atmosphere of faith, and intentionality that we actually live out what we claim to live out. The second was a culture of mistrust that is regular in the city, and I would just encourage you to go back and listen to that if you missed it, because I think it's really important that we understand the context and the culture that we live so that we can accurately live out being ambassadors for a different kingdom. And the third is a failure to celebrate and tell stories of what God has done. And so as a church, we want to really grow to being a culture that's marked by urgency and expectancy and intentionality. We want to be a people that are marked by trust and trustworthiness rather than mistrust of leadership and authority. And we want to be a culture that celebrates and tells good stories as we encourage one another to keep on. I would encourage you to go back and listen to that, and I'm really excited for our semester in the book of Ephesians.